Real quick, before we get started, I want to give a shout out to the sponsor of this podcast, Greenlight.ai. We all know how important compliance is, and Greenlight.ai is the leader for compliance and EOR services, especially for talent platforms. You're going to hear about them later, but thank you to Greenlight. Well, listen, Jamie, you are our first recording of the year, and I know I speak for Tony and I when I say we are beyond excited for this. I'll give a little context on this for you listeners out there. I think a stat that everyone keeps talking about right now is the 95% of AI projects that are failing. And a stat that no one is talking about is what happened if you combine AI plus the right structural talent transformation. And I'm willing to bet it would not be 95. It might be 0% or maybe 5% of failures. So I have two of the biggest HR nerds in the world on this podcast. And for you listeners, I'm going to probably not talk for the next 30 minutes intentionally because, Jamie, you run, I would say, the best HR transformation marketplace and talent platform. You had a big announcement that came out. This is going to be going out on Friday, I'm pretty sure. So on Wednesday, you said something really, really big. But I'm just going to stop there. And Jamie, if you want to introduce yourself, and then you have the privilege of Tony grilling you. And listeners, Tony prepared like a 7-page preparation doc for this episode. I just want you listeners to know that. Well, yeah, that's if you really want to get, a 7-page prep doc, come reach out to us. I doubt you can get it from Tony, but Jamie, you somehow have unlocked that. But listen, Jamie, hit us off. Give us a little intro on yourself.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, and it's great to get that with 5 minutes notice, by the way. That was awesome. Yeah, my background, I love HR. I spent over 20 years building an HR career in large global organizations, and then was a head of HR at a fast growing startup here in San Diego, and really was someone who was with organizations that were growing, changing, acquiring, and I just loved to build. That's really who I am. And so, as I talked to the guys I went to business school with, they said, you've always talked about doing your own thing. And I don't know that I was really aware of that. I went on my own in 2018, wrote a book on culture. I was doing a lot of culture and kind of HR transformation work. And as I did that, I had friends who were CHROs who said, I want to do what you're doing, but I'm afraid. I'm afraid of sales and business development. And that was really what led me to the thing I knew that I wanted to build something bigger than myself. I didn't know what it was. And what it is gig talent. Gig talent is it's like a casting agency, an agency for executive expert talent in the gig economy. And I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about that. But it's been really, really fun for me because really I'm doing what I always did. I'm getting people in the right roles. I'm helping companies transform, and I'm just doing it in a bigger and new way.
Jamie, that's great. We just met today, and already I think we both feel like this was a meeting destined to happen. We float in these same circles when it comes to both HR at an executive strategic level, but also how do you marry that with the future of talent, which is flexible, which is on demand, which is in a lot of ways fractional as well. And so I'm really excited. Just like Matt said, he wasn't exaggerating. Super excited to be talking to you, kicking off the year, talking to you, because this to me is exactly where we see the world of work going. But you mentioned, of course, Gig Talent is the name of the company. When we hear gig, people have all sorts of different reactions. What does that really mean? You tell us in the context of Gig Talent and your business, what does that mean versus a traditional, roles that people are used to?
What I think that is so exciting right now is that there's new ways that companies can engage talent. And so yes, we think about gig, and we used to think maybe traditional, like temporary kind of low skilled, kind of roles when you think about gig, or you think about, Uber drivers or something, right? But what's happened is that people, experts, leaders, executives are choosing to work differently. And they've got tons of valuable skills. They've sat in the seat. They have done thousands of reps with this work, right? And now companies can access them in new ways. And so that's like a game changer when you start thinking about, your talent strategy, when you think about obviously what roles are going to be maybe taken up with AI and other technology, but you also need expertise. And then, you and I could geek out on this, but, you start overlaying things like the population demographics and people starting to go into what I call, where you instead of retirement, it's preferment, where you do what you prefer. And a lot of people are choosing to do that, right? But they have highly valuable skills that companies need. And so now we can be much more precise. And so I love, I actually have been, tried to convince to change the name of the company, but I believe strongly that the gig economy is here to stay. We just have to get everybody on board to understand the opportunities that it brings.
Yeah, I think people hear gig and they get a weird feeling. Like you said, they think of Uber and maybe Handy or TaskRabbit or whatever. And those are good opportunities and good gigs. And those reflect the same thing that you're talking about, albeit at an executive level, a changing preference among a lot of people on the supply side of the workforce relationship. So let's talk about that a little bit more, because you're exactly right. Like that's where I am now, working with Matt at Human Cloud. I really like the autonomy versus my executive HR roles of the past. You had the same experience. Tell me a little bit more about how that experience informed creating a company to enable that for so many others.
I loved my career in HR and in companies and in corporate America. I worked with companies like Four Seasons Hotels and Resorts, Ingersoll Rand, Ingram Micro, really amazing companies and incredible people. I love being a part of a team. Like those things didn't change for me. As you rise and you start to kind of recognize what you're good at, and what you enjoy, you start to recognize, like, how do I do more of that, right? And so in those large, huge Fortune 100 companies, there's a lot of opportunities for someone like me because there's change and growth and big acquisitions and transformation and culture and this is broken, go fix it, those kinds of things. But as you rise, you start to go like, okay, how do I best leverage my unique value? Right. We talk a lot about superpowers, right? And as I started to identify mine, I was like, I can do this and bring that value to companies just for that. I don't have to do that. There's probably plenty of things that people tell you that I'm not as good at, but, leverage my unique skills in the best way. And so I started doing that. And as I did that, I was like, I think that there's a place for this. And it's really about moving beyond fear. So I think fear that was part of my own journey. In 2009, I remember sitting in my big corner office. It was like my first, I don't know, senior director job or something. And I loved my career. I loved my life. Everything was great. And I felt really disconnected from it. And as I started working with my first coach and doing work to kind of understand, okay, what is actually happening and what am I feeling here? It really was about fear. And I wasn't, from the outside, you wouldn't have looked at me and said, she's fear-based, right? And I was on all the tracks and doing all the things. But so I have this feeling that as individuals, fear plays a role in our life. And when I think about companies, fear plays a role, right? We stay safe. We don't want to disrupt our earnings. We don't want to take too big of a risk. If it's uncomfortable and we don't totally understand it, we revert to kind of our old contracts and things that we understand. And so that was a really long way of answering your question, but I built gig talent to help really all the stakeholders. We can do better as companies because now we have new ways to access this great talent, and we can serve the people who are taking that leap to work the way that they want, leveraging their unique skills. It's really a win-win.
Yeah, it really is. And I like that you talked about the contrast to status quo, because that's when anything feels risky, it's really easy to feel comfort in what you've been doing, because that's what even if you think it might be broken or there might be gaps. But there's risks to living in the status quo. Tell me a little bit about what risks organizations face when they just wait too long to adopt and embrace a strategy like flexible work.
I think I don't know any company that isn't evolving right now. We have internal and external factors that are affecting us in really dramatic ways, which means it's a really exciting time and also challenging time to be leading organizations. And I think, the risk of status quo, when you think about not adapting to change, not bringing people along, not it's so significant. Not only are you going to probably fail, and certainly be overcome by competitors, but your business model might become completely outdated. And at a minimum, there's like accountability from a shareholder and a financial perspective, just because there's better and smarter ways to do things today. So I think the status quo is kind of not an option from the lens that I see. The question is, how do you go about it, and how do you bring your organization along? And so what I love is we get to work with leaders who are starting to lean into some of those decisions, and starting that work within their organizations, whether it's literally just their team, if that's kind of their sphere of influence on what they can, make a decision on for right now, or if it's at an organizational or enterprise level.
Yeah, well, in a lot of the area where you focus is around transformation. Like, transformation can be big and small. Tell me a little bit about getting deeper into systems and getting into the organization, and especially the impact of AI. All of those things are changing constantly, and organizations have to be constantly adapting, but it's not easy to adapt.
I think you start with mindset. The companies that are doing this well, I think, are really making it part of the conversation. They're integrating it into their existing systems. So whether it's their standing meetings and talking about AI and sharing best practices and learning from each other and welcoming in that. And then really thinking through, to your point, like, okay, just getting people using ChatGPT or whatever AI assist tools that they're going to use, that's like, foundational. But how do you then reshape work? How do you, whether it's job design, overall org design, when you have a need for a resource, are you thinking about it? Can it be solved with, an AI agent or a tool, or, even better utilization of existing technology that the company has in their stack? Is it that, or is it a fractional leader, or is it an interim, or is it how do there's so many new solutions available to companies. But to your point, that muscle memory that we have in our organizational systems are really strong, and it pulls people back to kind of doing what we've always done. And so as we're helping companies, we're starting with mindset, and then you start integrating the changes on bigger scales. But it's at decision points is where you can have a big influence.
So you mentioned fear in a several different capacities. Fear from the individual that wants to work independently, fractionally, and they're afraid of having to hang their own shingle, do all the sales and marketing. What are all the logistics that they've never had to worry about before, but are truly the enabling factors? There's the fear for the organization. This is something they haven't done before. They're afraid of what the future brings, but they're not sure how to solve it. And I think all of that comes together with this general fear of something new, like we've talked about a bit. When you look back over the last several years that you've been working with HR and other executive leaders in organizations, where do you feel like the first places are where the fear starts to break down and they start to build a comfort level with doing something new and different? And then conversely, where do you feel like they just lock down and put up a wall and it's the hardest to break?
Yeah, I love these questions. Okay, so I think there's a couple of things. Like, first, when we have been going through dramatic change since 2020, right? And the companies that I think that we've seen do it well and we've helped them in their transformation they're approaching it like a collective experiment, right? We don't have all the answers. There isn't anybody out there who's navigated COVID before we had navigated COVID, or has implemented AI and is like perfectly the example, right? Like, we're all figuring it out. So owning that and inviting people to be part of that collective experiment and be with you on the journey and be part of shaping their own future, I think is a really good place to start. And it's also honest, because we don't know, right? We're going to navigate it as we go. And that's going to build trust, because it's true. And we as leaders, sometimes that means we have to resist the urge to try to have all the solutions or tell people exactly where we're going. But it's actually more honest. So so the flip side is trying to give the answer when we don't really know it. And then that just erodes trust. And we're seeing that across organizations pretty substantially. So I think inviting people to be part of the journey, I think identifying some quick hits that you can, some wins that you can have to solve pain points, right? So what pain points exist? And often the solutions are actually not heavy lifts, but that starts to ease the fear that people might have around, am I going to be out of a job? Am I at risk? Am I not going to be able to understand this? And it's like, oh, this just solved my, like, they become more open to it because it's helping them do their job better or work smarter or avoid that thing that was a pain, and they knew there was a better way to do it anyway. So those are like two big ideas. And then the where people shut down, I think, is when they just feel like they don't understand directionally why. And so really trying to explain, why is this important to our business? What is our business strategy? What is going to be the approach? And so I know that might sound contrary to what I just said, is that we don't have all the answers, but it's like, look, I mean, AI is happening. The functionality in our current tech stack is increasing. We want to continue to do more and be a competitive place to work that can afford to do great things for our employees and deliver for our customers and our clients. And so we're always going to be cutting edge, right? And so just being transparent about, and we're going to lean into that, right? We want to look at those opportunities. We want to be a front leader in our competitive space to understand how we can evolve our thinking, evolve our delivery, evolve our cost to produce whatever it is that we produce. Like, those are honest conversations. And I think you just have to invite people on that journey, so that, some people may shut down. There is change. And that's where I think really investing in that mindset shift around, hey, you can go work across, you may not like the changes we're making, but if you go across the street, they're changing too, because everybody's changing right now. So I get it. Change is uncomfortable, right? We get into that stretch zone and we want to revert back and play it safe, but that's really not an option. We're going to get passed over if we do that. So come on this journey, be part of designing your future.
Yeah, I love that, because it acknowledges and embraces the idea that in order to change, all the expertise that we might need may not be in-house, obviously, or maybe we would have already done it. So having the ability to tap into experts that have a wide variety of different experiences, just like the ones you shared, that their team doesn't have, it doesn't make them less than, it just makes them different. But being able to tap into that and borrow those resources to help the team move forward also helps that change happen. And we know, like you said, change is happening whether we like it or not. The more we can be in the driver's seat, proactively drive that change, the more confident we feel going into it. The problem is, if we don't have all the expertise, or like you said, we don't have the answers ourselves, it feels like a risky proposition. So talk to me a little bit about how tapping into these resources, like those that are part of the gig talent team, enable people to get over those hurdles and really do things that they hadn't seen or thought of or done before to achieve their goals.
This is something that kind of hits home for me on a few different levels, because I can remember being a head of HR and thinking I had to have all those solutions and I should be able to navigate and facilitate my executive team to do whatever. This is a time where it can be very powerful to pull in an external expert, because they can say the thing that someone who's part of the system might know, but has different investment in whether they can say it or not. I loved the opportunity. I worked with Dolby on an HR transformation for a couple of years and ended up leading their global business partner team through a transformation. And one of the quotes that one of their leaders said to me is, like, Jamie was a truth teller, and she would say the thing even when it was uncomfortable. And, it's that opportunity to help companies transform and to look in the mirror, and with that external lens. And sometimes when it's like, if you're sitting in your house and that box has been in the corner for 5 years because you said you'd move it, and, you just got used to the box. Well, somebody else could come in and be like, do you need that box sitting there? Right. So it's not that I couldn't have figured out about the box, but I just got used to it. Right. And so bringing in that external expert, someone, but not a $20 million necessarily consultant or a new analyst that just graduated college, right? Someone who's actually sat in the seat, navigated organizational complexities, understands how change happens and change works, and can sit with you to really implement. That can be extremely powerful. And so I think that we sometimes underestimate the value of that external lens because you think we do have these, we do have these resources. We have really smart people on our team, but it can be very powerful to help really get everybody going and get alignment around the direction that we want to go and everybody kind of rowing in the same direction.
Yeah, yeah, and you touched on something. Matt and I commiserate in this all the time. There's a stigma around gig or freelance, but there's also a stigma around consulting. When someone raises their hand and says, I'm a consultant, there's lots of thoughts that float in the air. The first one being, oh, you couldn't get a job. So there's the same dynamic plays out. And even when you go for the big, big brand consultants, there's a stigma attached to that, which is pricey, which is overwork, and which is leave you a bunch of documents, but not the execution.
100%.
That's at least from the top of my head. I'm sure you've got more.
100%. I hear it over and over. Either like couldn't get a job or using a 10-year-old playbook, right? That, or to your point, they're going to give me some huge strategy that might be great, but it connects not at all to the reality of my organization and I can't implement it. So then we leave and we've got this great plan and nothing actually happens, right? And so what I love is we do both. We can do the strategy and the implementation and work with the organization through implementation, or we can pick up if you already engaged that $20 million big firm and are looking for how do you translate it into something that you can use and actually implement, we step in there too. And I think what's different is that it's just the talent, it's the supply, right? Like amazing people. I mean, if you look at the certified consultants that we have in our collective, they're former they've been successful. And they were so successful that they chose to go be entrepreneurs with their own businesses and own practices doing what they're great at because they're good at it. Right? Like that's how good they are. It's the opposite of the mindset that I think many of us grew up with.
Hey everyone, real quick, I want to talk about the risk that is involved with an independent workforce. No matter where you are, whether it's the US, whether it's Brazil, whether it's the EU, whether it's London, there is risk in how you classify and how you work with individuals. Unfortunately, it's not as easy as just paying someone. The classification, the actual collaboration, the contracts, the payments, everything is intertwined and must be connected in a way that doesn't get you in trouble with the tax authorities, regulatory authorities, and even potentially class action lawsuits. There are numerous examples of this. Just search classification lawsuit and you'll get plenty. Which is why today's sponsor, Greenlight.ai, is the modern EOR, modern compliance solution for the modern workforce. There's 4 things that we want to call out when hiring an independent worker that you need. And that is you need to onboard, you need to classify, you need to send payments, and you need to manage this global workforce. It's more than just one person, and Greenlight has all of that covered. All right, I want you to head over to greenlight.ai and tell them Human Cloud sent you.
Yeah, I think, listen, for me in particular, when I first went to Upwork and then joining Matt at Human Cloud, a big part of my mentality was I don't want to go to just one company and only impact that company. I know I can make an impact. I know I can drive change, build teams, etc. But when I have to go to one company, that's all I'm going to do for 3, 5+ years. Whereas I want to be a part of multiple different companies in different industries, in different, growth stages, and get the experience of working through whatever diversity of experience they're going through, and also the experience of working with totally different teams. That makes me better as a leader, but I also love the impact I can have. And I think a lot of HR leaders that are taking opportunities that you're able to present are looking for the same kind of rewarding impact that they can have on an organization.
It's 100% true. And I'll tell you, to your point about learning, like I add so much more value today because of that access that I've had to different industries, different companies, different stages. different teams, right? And you hit on something that's important to me. Like, I love being part of a team. I grew up as an athlete. I loved being part of organizational teams. I didn't go on my own because I couldn't do it and wasn't successful, or didn't want to be part of a team, right? And so part of gig talent is actually building that sense of community. So the people that have gone on their own, they're independent, they have their own company, but they're also part of something bigger. They're part of this gig talent collective. So they feel like they can be part of a team. We actually team them like you would if you went to a traditional big firm, right? On a large scale transformation project, right? Maybe you have a lead and a change person and a comms person and a PM or whatever. And we can do that. So they can still feel like a team, and they're achieving having their own practice and their tax identity and, entity and all those things, right? Like, so you can, it's really a structure for people leaning into the opportunities and the way that things are changing. And that is a game changer for companies to understand this new access to talent. And I love that I get to be here with you, because I feel like I just want everyone to understand it. And I think it's happening. I mean, you definitely see it. And I think that we're going to continue in the next, if my friend set is any like test case, right? And you think about kind of people thinking about a countdown to that stage, that performance stage, it's in the next 5 years, we're going to see even more people transition. And I think people will be, once they're like, oh, that leader that I had that was like the best leader I ever had is now a consultant, which doesn't mean a 4-letter word. Like, they're going to go, oh, that means they're really good, right? Like, so when it's not just someone you've heard about, but people they're going to start to understand what that means.
Yeah, I love that. I think it does change the way that people think about the way work can get done in their organization, and the way that they can provide work or provide leadership for an organization. I'm curious, this is something I think about all the time, and this is an example of me nerding out, like Matt says. But what do you think the current balance is between labor driving this change and employers desiring the change and needing it? Because I know we talked about resistance and things like that, but the fact of the matter, we talk about this all the time with these constant massive layoffs and organizations going through these buildups and then breakdowns. Clearly, there's a need for something that fits the dynamic environment within which these companies operate. In the old system of work is failing, because nobody wants to be hiring a ton of people to turn around and fire them, but they still do it. So this is an alternative that seems like it's needed, but it also seems like we're pushing it more. We, as in labor in general, because more than 50% of folks want to, if they're not already, be independent, be freelance. More than 50% of graduates go directly into independent work. So we see that labor shift, but I feel like we're still knocking on the door of enterprises to go, are you ready for us yet?
Yeah, my sense is kind of the same, that balance is a little bit off. But I think that it's interesting because you bring up the early career folks, and I think that's a whole different conversation too that I want to solve, but I don't have it figured out. But I think that you're right. More than 50% of the workforce is already involved in the gig economy in some way. And with that companies are starting to, like, they know they want to hire this person, and now they're being presented in different ways. I think there's, a certain amount of population that are just very flexible. They're like, I don't really care what you call me, employee, consultant, just don't call me mediocre, right? Like, that's kind of the plan. But so there's some that kind of flip in and out. And so we do see people moving, from employee to different types of engagements. And that, I think, is, on one hand, it's helping companies, but it's also blurring the line, because it allows them to think they're resisting the change, right? So it's an interesting thing. But I think that the bottom line is that there's this kind of things like a confluence that's happening right now between the workforce preferences and the way that people want to work, and the challenges that we're seeing within cultures and organizations with, the erosion of trust, the whole thing around how work gets done and flexibility and what does that mean, the requests, the expectations that employees have from their leaders, and a really kind of a redefinition of what that means. Like there's major shifts happening in so many different ways. And so yes, we just need, skills. And we see like leading companies who think that, like we're a really desirable place to work. You're going to want to come here regardless. And there's a certain amount of the population that is willing to do that. And maybe they'll resist some change. But I think as they see other companies leverage the flexibility around talent to drive their financials forward or to get results faster, then they might start to come around as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think on that note, let's pick on HR for a second. With the different interactions you've had with executive leaders, considering working with a different type of workforce dynamic, how much or less does HR embrace this than their CEO, CFO, COO, CIO counterparts? In your experience, where is their level of readiness to start working in this way and recommending these types of strategies?
I think it really depends on the HR person and the company itself. So we see people doing it. They just call it different things, right? Like the CEO has a management consultant or an executive advisor coach person that they trust, that they use. They just never thought that they were part of the gig economy or so they like they're already sitting there. They just don't know it. So there's a little bit of that. On the HR side, I think it depends, right? There's this, as you grow as an HR person, I don't know if this was true for you, Tony, but it certainly was true for me. You rise because you're responsive, you get answers, you find the solution and you deliver results. And as you scale, then it becomes not necessarily about always having the answers. It actually becomes about having powerful questions and about helping others solve their own problems. But as you transition to that, there's this like, oh, you mean I am actually doing well at my job by bringing in the right expert? It doesn't have to be me, right? Am I failing if I have to bring in somebody else? I can remember that at an executive level, like thinking I should be able to facilitate our executive offsite. And I could. It wasn't that I couldn't, but I needed to participate. I needed to sit in a different seat, right? Like so bringing in that expert who was the right, alignment with what we were trying to achieve, who was going to be able to really pull in the best from everyone and get us to the results we wanted. That was me doing my job. And so there's a little bit of a shift, I think, depending on where people are at in their understanding and comfort level, just with their own, career confidence. There's also different companies have different philosophies around external resources. And it's not always about right or wrong, but to me, it's about the evolution and understanding the possibilities and then deciding what's right for your organization.
You make a really good point. Sometimes there's kind of this policy approach that folks defer to that's been around for a long time that probably needs to be challenged a bit. It doesn't have to be totally upended, but it needs to flex just like the workforce so that they can start to experiment, as you said before, and that experimentation can lead to policy changes that make all of this that much more possible.
Yeah.
Congrats to us, because we spent about 30 minutes talking. We really haven't spent much of that time talking about AI. But while I was getting ready to ask you about 2025 trends, and I'm going to feed you the first one, which is around AI and the productivity promise and the transformation associated with it. Tell me about what you saw over last year as it relates to organizations trying to find their way around this new world of AI.
Oh, it's really fascinating because, some are stuck at the just compliance and security and data security and InfoSec kind of space. Some, around policy, right? And then others are around behavior. Many have gotten beyond that. And they're starting to integrate, but then they're trying to get, their arms around, is this an IT thing? Is this an HR thing? How do we create a committee? Is this somebody's job? How do we, right? Like they're trying to figure it out. We see lots of new titles that have AI in them, which is great. But it's really about that cross-functional alignment and cross-functional work that's going to be powerful in moving organizations through this change. And so I think that's what we're going to see more of, is really these uh, rather than it being, like as an HR exec, I can within my function decide whatever I'm going to do, and I can do that pretty quick. But when I need to move my whole enterprise along and do that cross-functionally, that's going to take it's a bigger lift and it's going to take longer, but that's what's really going to move the needle. So I think that's what we're going to start to see more of.
Yeah, and I think those implementations that affect functions across the board are the ones that we kind of slow down on. What maybe it's the performance management system. Okay, I want to make this change. I know it's better. I know it's more efficient. But there's people in every function that are going to be like, I like the way we used to do it. I like the written pieces of paper. I like the 9-block, and so they resist it, even though there may be a more efficient, more effective way to implement tools that can improve their coaching, improve their employee, management, et cetera. I think it's oftentimes a matter of who's been there and done that. And if you have people in an organization that haven't seen it before, the next thing that they look for, which was me when I was at Stanley, introduced to Upwork, I resisted it forever until I found out that GE it was already doing it.
Right.
P&G was already like, oh, if they're doing it, why aren't we doing it? Like, if they've already gotten over that hurdle, why can't we? And that was a catalyst for us to really dig after it and figure out how can we make this happen in our organization. Oftentimes it's knowing what are those examples, what are those experiences, and who are those folks that have done it, what are their mistakes, and what have they done well. What I think is really great about talking to you is you have a podcast where you talk about these kind of things. Can you talk a little bit about how you leverage your podcast to get people more comfortable with the kind of change that can happen in their organization?
Yeah, the podcast is called The Courageous Choice, and it's really about that leadership at the edge of change, right? And so whether we're looking at the future of work, the future of HR, how things are changing, and that internal work around, I'm making, like, this feels like a risk, right? What do we do? And I love talking to leaders who have done that. As you were talking though, Tony, one of the things that came up for me as well is really about this idea of experimentation. I would encourage people, like, yes, I get it. Some companies are not, they're more conservative, or they are bigger ships to turn, and they may not be the first movers. But I would just say, if you wait until somebody's figured it out, you're going to be so behind. So why not, like, you don't have to bet the farm, but like, do an experiment, do something, start whether it's literally an experiment, and just see if it works, and dip your toe in and start seeing, and then, do more, just like you do with anything else, do more of what works, correct what doesn't, build some practice and rigor around that assessment, and being honest, and having, retrospectives, and I forget what they call the then advance, like all the stuff, right? To start just having a discipline around managing change and leaning into the new work, so that it doesn't have to be scary, and it doesn't have to mean we go from, I don't know, reviews that we like to no reviews at all. Like, maybe there's something in between, but what are we trying, like, challenge it with the conversation of, why do we even have reviews? What are we trying to accomplish? Like, is it really a CYA so we have something in somebody's file? Okay, then let's be honest about that. If it's not, like, if we want to have meaningful conversations, like, we think we're driving that with this process, are we? How do we make it? What are we trying to accomplish? And that's what's exciting to me. I mean, this is like, you're hearing all my passion, but I just love this opportunity to kind of like really ask that about everything. Why are we doing that? What are we trying to achieve? Because it's not about right or wrong in most of these answers. It's about right or wrong depending on what you're trying to do, and what you're trying to achieve, and what your business strategy is, and what you care about, right? So to me, there's opportunity in that, and that makes me excited.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's a ton of opportunity. It's incredibly exciting. I know Matt feels the same way, because we both feel like by helping people get their head around the opportunity, the possibilities with leveraging talent marketplaces, and the extensive expertise and experience that exists within them, we can stand up rock stars within organizations. We can help people drive. Change is scary, yes, but when that change starts and you see the momentum building and you are the champion and it's successful, it's a phenomenal feeling. And that's what we want to help promote so many people that work with us to have that experience. And we know the marketplaces, just like gig talent, really want to make their champions a big success. They want them to be rock stars. Obviously, it serves you, but it serves everybody, because it introduces and finally gets in place the kind of impact we know is possible, but that just takes the courage that leadership needs.
I love it. I love it, Tony. It's so exciting. You know, as you were speaking, I had this image of my nephews who are 10 and they just won a soccer tournament, and it's 3 boys like holding up the trophy, right? And like, that's what we want. We want this team of integrated talent, the right people in the right roles, but coming together to deliver whatever that winning the trophy is for your organization. And it is so exciting to be, you know, I don't know what role I'd be on the field there, but like, you know, whether it's the cheerleader or the coach behind the scenes, you know, I don't know, but something. And it's extremely rewarding. And I get to feel like I'm part of those wins, even if I wasn't, you know, like I'm not doing the consulting anymore, right? But I get to feel part of seeing that success and get to tell, you know, those stories to help clients learn from what others are doing that's winning. Because to your earlier point, things are changing so quickly. We should be sharing. Not obviously, we're not sharing like secrets and all that kind of stuff, but you know, we should be able to share some ideas of how companies are innovating and using that to win in their respective industries.
Now, Jamie, that visual, I couldn't help but think you mentioned earlier. You mentioned your nephew's playing sports. You mentioned that you were an athlete. We have to take a quick tangent, and I want to know what sport you played, what position, and how did you like it? Do you still play whatever that is?
No. So I played, so you learned a little bit about me. I'd like to do a lot of things, and I always like to do a lot of things. So as a kid, I played basketball, I played volleyball, and I played soccer for like 10 years. And then obviously in high school, I had to choose between basketball and soccer, and I went with basketball. I love it. I love being part of a team. I think that it's just something that helps you understand contributing to something greater than yourself, contributing to the communities that you're part of. To me, it's like at a values level. I'll tell you just a little story. My dad was like an avid golfer, like scratch golfer. And he didn't have any boys, so I was kind of his proxy. And we were, he really wanted me to learn golf. And so he sets me up with his pro and, you know, we go and learn golf, and I'm kind of frustrated because I liked the team sports and golf seemed really slow. Anyway, so I go up, the guy says, okay, you do this, you take this drive, you swing back. Well, okay, you do it. And I step up, and he didn't move out of the way, and I clubbed him over the back. Right. And he screamed a word that I won't say on your podcast. And I was like not excited about golf from that point on. But today, as a professional, like I'll get out every once in a while and make my dad proud. But it's pretty funny when you talk about sports. I just think it's part of really understanding how teams work together. I love it. Now I'm doing more pickleball and things like that. But when you think about, you know, our teams, and I have kids, I have 2 kids in their 20s, and you start thinking about this next generation and the isolation and many other things that they've faced, whether it's sports or the idea of winning as a team. I think as we start to design work and lean into this experimentation and in inviting people to be part of this journey with us, there's something in that about recreating that experience at a professional level that might tap into something that they haven't had that will be exciting for some that they might not have experienced yet.
Yeah, that's a really great segue into the future where we'll wrap this. But I often think about the same thing. Like I have young kids. I watch them interact with their friends. We've moved several times. They're still in touch on a daily basis with their friends that live in Indiana while
Nice.
they're here in South Carolina. And it's because technology has made it really easy for them to stay in touch in a much more robust way than just dialing somebody up on a living room or kitchen phone. And so even though I see the same thing, there's lots of isolation because it's really easy to be home and be by yourself and go down scrolling, you know, rabbit holes. But it's also really easy to stay constantly connected, maybe to a fault. So there's a lot of weird changes that we experience every day in our life, but also that impact our work. When you look forward to 2026, what do you anticipate, is going to be some of the big, or are going to be some of the big changes or trends as it relates to workforce and managing all these unpredictable dynamics?
I think the biggest thing is that agility is going to matter more than many other things. So when I think about us shifting, from static organizational models to more ecosystems of talent. Companies they've got like their alumni and all different kinds of groups. So thinking about that, I call it integrated talent, but it could be, however you're thinking about it. So I think that away from those static organizational models, those just aren't working. It's also true about, the competencies that we're looking for in the people that we hire. It's regardless of the function or the job specific, needing people who are agile and have the right mindset to join you on the journey, because you can for most organizations, the company that they join today is going to be different in 12 months. And I think that I wrote about this, but it's that building, for access to the right talent, not necessarily ownership. And that's a little bit of a shift in mindset, going back to your, we have all the best minds, and if you're a consultant, you probably suck. It's not necessarily that way, but how do we get the right mix of people in the room, regardless of that? And that's going to challenge our thinking. Trying to think what others. Yeah, I think it's just about the agility, and really rewarding speed and courage, and looking, that's one thing. You and I talked a little bit about that, but the rewarding people who take those risks, rewarding people who lean into change. If your organizational system, whether you recognize it or not, is, shuts people down or fires the people that took the risk, or, allows, I've seen a lot of organizations that say, we want the change, and then they're like, well, we didn't mean that change. Right. And then they kind of shut it down. Just be honest with yourself. If that works for you, then great. But I think, that what companies are going to need to understand is that really serving and getting them where they need to go.
Yeah. And I like that. Yeah, I totally agree with agility. We're big fans of building out a talent ecosystem. I think a lot of organizations feel like, oh, I've got an ecosystem. I got these vendors I work with. And we mean taking that to another level, a level that requires you to rethink your workforce planning, that doesn't allow you to just keep doing the same thing and pulling the same levers. This gives you a lot more variety and a lot more optionality than exists today. So I absolutely agree with that. And I also will keep beating this drum of a transition from a talent acquisition mindset to a talent access mindset. Because the idea that you own your talent, I think, is bygone. And the idea that you're better off if you think about, I need these skills. Can I get them? Can I find someone that can do that and work with them when I need it? That should be the priority. And that requires a mindset shift. But I think it's required to have the workforce of the future.
I think you're totally right. I think that this idea of ownership, one, to your point about layoffs, right, people don't want to be owned if you're just going to lay me off, right? So that doesn't sound great. And then there are people that might remain because they're risk adverse and they feel safe. And that's great if they're contributing what you need. But what I've seen, I forget what it's called, but if you remember there was an old study or experiment where they had, I think it was rats, and if they went to the left, they got zapped. And if they went to the right, they got zapped. And then eventually they were all standing still. And I think there are a lot of organizations where they have a lot of people standing still.
Yeah.
And so the question is, how do you activate them, right? How do you activate them? And, I don't want to own you if you're only going to stand still, right? I mean, that's like the worst analogy, but I think that there is really something to think about around how do you create these ecosystems of activated people feeling excited about contributing, right? And seeing their path to contribution, which requires clarity around what you're trying to achieve, alignment. And I think that companies, as they do that, they will find so much waste that they don't know they have right now. And to me, that's like exciting opportunities.
It's all those boxes that have been sitting around for 5 years that they've ignored.
100%.
Gotten used to. Well, yeah. Jamie, again, it's really a delight to have you on our podcast and have this conversation with you. Naturally, organizations that are thinking about being more agile, embracing this, dynamic marketplace that we're living in, and it's getting even faster and more dynamic. They can go to your organization, Gig Talent, and learn more. They can reach out to you on LinkedIn as well. Learn more about how to look at this differently, how to embrace talent differently, and then they can leverage your talent that has a variety of experience to either be the catalyst in the organization or actually execute the change. Did I say all that right? What else would you amend in that statement?
That's it. We would love to, join people who are walking on this journey, whatever stage that they're at, and really help them evolve to the organization that they want to be. It's an exciting time. We've got incredible people that are part of the Gig Talent Collective. And we've done the work to understand who's good and what they're good at. So we make it easy for companies to access that right partner to join them on their journey. Our website's gigtalentagency.com, and we'd love to hear from you.
That's great. And listen, this is what Human Cloud exists for. We want to link those people in need, those enterprise change makers, with the platforms and marketplaces that can help them drive that change. And that's hopefully what we're accomplishing here. That's our mission as we go forward, is being that kind of marketplace for marketplaces. And we owe the driver and the creation of this mindset at Human Cloud to Matt Mottola. So Matt, I'll let you wrap it up with a final comment.
I have one thing to say. Gig Talent, number 5 on the kudos leaderboard, 15 total kudos, and number 1 in the top HR badge. For 2025. Can't wait for 2026. Jamie, thank you for hopping on. Let's all go make a lot of impact and money, but impact most importantly. Jamie, thank you so much for hopping on.
Thank you both. So fun.